dark and quiet street in New Paris. Birds chirp in the distance, and a woman walks down the street. She hears a set of bins fall and clank against the stone floor. The woman turns to face the sound. "Hello?" she calls out. "Is anybody there?" Her calls disturb something in the darkness. Whatever it is, it struggles through the dark and dingy alleyway. The clattering sounds turn into footsteps. It's getting closer to the woman. She cried out at the creature. Whatever it was, her screams died as the TARDIS landed in the alleyway a short distance away. I stepped out the TARDIS first. The doctor told me I had to, and I was still unsure of his new self still. But with Julia taking a break on the beach in the TARDIS. Yes, I know, right? The TARDIS. Beach in a time and space machine. Who'd have thought it? Anyways, Roxy was seeing a boyfriend for a few days after disappearing for 3 months on him. She wanted to try and spend a lot more time back in her world. Either way, I knew we'd all be back together soon. Still, I looked at the doctor and he patted his cravat and nudges my shoulder. He smiled at me, and he looked like the doctor I used to know. Just for a second anyway. He walked on ahead and I followed, and we stepped out of the alley to see the lights glow against the night sky, followed by the Eiffel Tower in Paris. But odd. Paris, I asked. Looks a bit too modern. New Paris in 2067, beamed the doctor, just after the 19th French Civil War, man versus machine. Digital warfare, sheep robots, it was mundane. How, I asked, hoping to get more information from the doctor. However, they quickly changed the subject. It just was, but now New Paris is a utopian society. Crime is nearly eradicted from the streets and poverty is at its universal low. It's one of the best places to visit. You're rambling, I informed him. The doctor fell silent. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer. The doctor stepped back into the alley. He knelt down over something, and by the time I'd arrived, I saw it too. I'm sorry, little guy, the doctor said. The doctor was examining the torn, shredded body of a cat. I gagged. I looked up and spotted more past the TARDIS, and I told the doctor, and he looked up the alleyway. Sad. Very sad. He looked up really hurt, and I mean like personally offended. I got the feeling that this doctor cared for animals, but I couldn't tell if he'd have the same reaction if it were human. These poor animals, it looks like somebody's eaten them, said the doctor, his sadness suddenly turning into rage. Eaten them? I asked. You don't need to look, said the doctor, putting a hand around my shoulder. He turned to me. Maybe you should go back to the TARDIS. Why, I asked. What are you going to do? Whatever killed these cats wasn't natural. I want to find out what it was, said the doctor, and at that moment the creatures leaped from above and landed in front of us, growling and snarling, and the doctor and I screamed in shock, and the doctor positioned himself for the fight. The doctor warned it to stay back. The creature raised its arm to strike. I pulled the doctor back, and we dodged its swipe. As the doctor and I fell disorientated, a loud thud of metal echoes through the alleyway, along with another loud thud of the creature's body hitting the floor. When we got up, we noticed that the creature was bleeding out from its throat. The doctor took off his waistcoat to stop the bleeding, but a man was stood nearby, brandishing a harpoon gun. No need for that, he said. We can still save it, the doctor stated. I can't let you do that. You killed it. Why? Killed it? Good. Disgusting brute's been a pain in my backside for a good while. Glad to finally got rid of it. The man was smug with his kill, and I wasn't having any of it. You monster! I shouted at him. I think you'll find the only monster here is lying in a pool of its own blood. Now I'm afraid this is where I'm going to have to leave you. The man turned around to leave. The doctor jumped at him and grabbed his arm, but the man was too quick. He turned and aimed his harpoon gun at the doctor. He warned him to stay back, and the doctor steps back, hands in the air. The man turned and fled away. We both looked at each other bemused, but when we turned to the creature, it was being mourned by 2 others. Sleep well, sister, said the female stranger. I'm sorry, said the doctor solemnly. The male stranger looked up to us both. We apologise for the instruction, my master. He was acquainted with the cadaver. "And who are you both?" I asked. The female stranger stood up and looked up to us both. She dried her teary eyes before introducing herself. My name is Vasten Bearmount, and this is my loyal friend Niles. We saw you attempt to save her, despite her attacking you." "I never want to see an animal killed for my sake, Miss Bearmount," the doctor said. "I assure you she did not want to kill you. She was just simply afraid. The thirst for blood was too much," she explained. The doctor nodded. He seemed to understand, but I was none of the wiser. The TARDIS was right there in front of us. Inside was Julia relaxing on the beach. Boy, I wish I was there sunbathing too. I missed a whole chunk of the conversation at this point. It seemed we were going to Vasten's house. Not sure how the doctor always gets us in these situations. We entered Vasten's home. It was a beautiful old mansion with fireplace crackling away quietly and a great-grandfather clock that ticks away the minutes. Vasten looks at us. "Welcome to my home. It's not much, but it's mine," she said very happily. "Wow, it's beautiful," I exclaimed. Vasten was very pleased with my compliment, and she told us to follow Niles, and he led us through the mansion. As we walked up the grand stairs, I looked back to see that Vasten had left the house through the main exit. Niles left us alone in the bedroom. It was very spacious. It had 2 beds on either side of the room, but that didn't stop the doctor from thinking. He was very quiet. In fact, it lasted almost half an hour before he even spoke. "What's going on, Doc? Look, you were quiet the entire drive here, and you wouldn't reply to Vasten, and even pretended to be asleep until we arrived. What's the matter?" I asked, perfectly, a bit too passionate in my tone. Then again, the doctor had been adjusting, and I wasn't exactly happy with him. The doctor remained silent. "Well?" I asked a bit more forcefully. "What do you want, Henry?" the doctor snapped. "A detailed explanation of why I don't trust Vasten? Why we're standing in his home?" "Well, yes," I asked, surprised he even had to ask. The doctor sighed. "I recognise that creature." I prompted the doctor for an answer, but it wasn't what I was expecting. "A vampire, Henry," the doctor said calmly. "A very deformed specimen, mind you, but undoubtedly a vampire. What we saw in the alley was almost identical to what I saw in 2001, all those years ago." I laughed. "What? A vampire?" The doctor continued his explanation. "My people hunted them to near extinction, but various subspecies and mimics have risen throughout the ages, and let me tell you, it is a Time Lord's duty to eradicate any form of vampire, no matter the price." We had a brief pause as I tried to take in this information, and the doctor shook his head and said he needed some air to clear his head. I tried to join him, but he said he needed some time to ground himself, so he left swiftly. I left the room maybe a minute after him and walked down to the grand hall. It was there I saw the doctor who was talking to Vasten. "Look, I know you're a vampire," said the doctor, very sternly. "And I know you're a Time Lord," said Vasten, with a smirk. "So we're on the same page then?" he asked. "I don't believe so," she said. "I don't wish to harm you, Doctor, neither do I wish to harm anyone. Do you? Our species are ancient enemies. We are destined to destroy each other." The doctor got cut off by Vasten. "Are we really boiling this down to destiny?" The doctor glared at her. Vasten walked past them and turned to him. "You may continue to stay at this house. I have no reason to harm you, I can assure you. And these wolves have ears too," she warned. "Who was that in the alley?" the doctor asked quickly. Vasten smirked. She'd had enough of his games for tonight, and she left the room. The doctor grunted and left the house swiftly, and at that point I knew I had to follow. The doctor didn't trust this place, yet he deemed it was safe enough to leave me alone. I mean, one human left in a house of vampires. It didn't look good for me, did it? But once again, the doctor forgot about silly old me. Typical. And I bet he still wished he could have sent me back to my universe. Maybe that's why he kept forgetting about me. Anyway, when I got outside, I found him stood in the courtyard with a review that overlooked Paris in the distance. I walked over and looked at him. Maybe I was mistaken, but I was still angry at him for leaving me there alone. "You could have told me you'd left. I don't fancy being in a house of vampires, you know," I said loudly. The doctor looked down. Something was troubling him, but I didn't care. "What is it with you recently, Doctor? What's going on?" I asked. The doctor looked at me. His eyes were sad, but his body language didn't convey that. He wanted to appear strong. "I'm sorry, Henry. I'm not quite myself still." We were silent for a couple of seconds. Then I spoke up. "Is this to do with your resurrection?" I asked. The doctor nodded. He didn't want to say any more. I had another think, but it must have been very scary for him. And look, I know he didn't die, but something about his atoms breaking up and then being put back together, it's still got to be pretty traumatic for the poor guy. Maybe I was hard on him, but then I think about how hard he was on me when he first laid his eyes on me again. "We'll talk later, alright?" I said to the doctor, and he nodded silently again. He cleared his throat and suggested that we investigated the mansion further. I thought it was a bad idea, but still, we've got to start somewhere. So we snuck into Vasten's study first, and I asked the doctor, who was so determined against Vasten, if she just wanted to live her own life. He surprised me when he said that was not the case, and he went on to say, "I'm looking for the man in the alley, the man who killed that creature. Vasten must have some details on him somewhere." The doctor opened a desk drawer in the study, searching for the files for minutes before slapping down a folder. The photo on the front showed the man they were looking for. "It's him!" I exclaimed. According to this, his name is Funskmit, and his metaphorical thrones in Vasten's side. "He's hunting them?" I asked. "Despicable," the doctor said. "That's a strong word," Finn said from the shadows. I jumped out of my skin when he spoke from behind us. What was he doing here? And why now? The doctor didn't seem fazed, and he turned to face Finn in the darkness. "Funskmit, I can't say it's a pleasure." Finn smirked and agreed, but he said that he and the doctor had very similar interests. The doctor was quick to backfire at him, but Finn barked back, and they both want the erudition of the vampires. "So, tell me about the forge," said the doctor. Finn's face dropped. The doctor smiled at him. "That's touch a nerve, hasn't it?" he said. "Shut up!" Finn shouted. His voice echoes through the study. This obviously caused attention as Niles enters the room from behind Finn. Startled, Finn turns around and fires the harpoon gun at Niles. Puncturing his chest, Niles fell to the ground, bleeding out. "No!" I shouted out. Niles was now drowning in his own blood. Vasten burst into the room. Literally, she cried out for Niles and cradled him in her arms. And his heart stopped beating. Her eyes turned a crimson red as she looks up to Finn. Finn raises his harpoon gun, but the doctor was quick. He kicked the gun out of Finn's hand and Nick looped him in place. "Kill him!" screamed Vasten. "Shut it, you beast!" Finn shouted back. "My dear friend, lost to a vile vagabond." "I promise you, Vasten," the doctor said, "he will face justice." Vasten's crimson eyes sharpened. "He deserves to drown in his own blood, as he did to Niles!" And within that split moment of a second, she jumped up. Her hands reached out for Finn, and the doctor wouldn't have any time to stop her and keep a hold on Finn, but I did. I grabbed her hand, and she looked to me and asked me what I was doing. "Helping you," I said. "He must pay!" she shouted. "Oh, shut it!" Finn screamed. "He must face a fair trial," the doctor shouted. "A fair trial?" Finn kicks the doctor's leg, then elbows him in the face. The doctor fell back and Finn grabs his harpoon gun and he aims it at the doctor. "No!" Vasten shouted as she jumps in front of the doctor, taking the hit for him. "Vasten!" I shouted as she hit the ground, mortally wounded. Finn stepped back. "Wait. No, I didn't. Look at what you've done. Oh, the forge! Was it worth it?" the doctor shouted. "For king and country!" he barked back. The forge is gone!" the doctor shouted. Vanstan's crimson red eyes were glowing in colour. He turned to Finn and stood up. I tried to help her, but it was very clear that her vampire instincts were assisting her more than I ever would. "For Niles," she said. "Don't!" the doctor pleaded. Vasten wasn't listening and she ran to Finn. Finn, terrified, tried to arm his harpoon gun. Again, too late. Vasten grabbed him and forced him back through the window. They both fell out of the building and fell to their deaths in the courtyard. So the doctor and I walked into the courtyard and looked at the bodies. We had a moment's silence. "You tried to help her, Doctor?" I asked. "But you've been confronting her and giving a stern warning to her all night." "You saw our conversation?" the doctor asked me. "The walls have ears, like she said," I replied. "Last night you wanted to kill all vampires. What changed?" Watching Vasten mourn Now's passing, I saw that I judged her as a cold, blood-sucking creature that I'd been taught to believe. "But I didn't for one second consider the person," said the doctor. "Now that weight is on my shoulders. What happened here? It's my fault." "No, you're wrong," I said. "It's not your fault at all. Finn started this. He had the harpoon gun and he shot Niles, not you. Look, Doctor, I know you blame yourself for a lot of the things you've done in the past, but I promise you, Doctor, I promise you from my heart, this was not down to you. This was not you. You tried your best. I promise you, Doctor, this was not you." And in this moment I put my hand on the doctor's shoulder for reassurance, and he gave me half a smile. "I'm hurt, Henry. I'm hurt that Vasten, who sacrificed herself for me, a woman who I showed the least respect for until those final moments. I need to do better. To people. Just people in general." I smiled. I think that was the first time the doctor acknowledged his problems. He needs to work on this, and I was going to be there for him. "TARDIS?" I asked. "TARDIS," the doctor replied. We both walked out of the grounds together, back to the city, and back home.